Single black dad drives his drunk boss home after the company party. When she wakes up, the morning light of Chicago cut through the glass walls of the Sterling Corp lobby, glinting off the polished marble floors. The air hummed with expensive quiet, a sound of money and ambition. Leo, at 65, moved through it with a slow, practiced rhythm, his janitor's cart the only thing that made a sound. He paused, his eyes catching a faint, almost invisible water stain spreading from a planter near the main elevator bank. "Are you getting paid to stand there?" The voice was sharp, tailored like the suit it came from. Julian Croft, the firm's star senior manager, stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of casual disdain. He held a leather-bound portfolio like a weapon. He didn't look at Leo, but at the two junior associates beside him, smirking for their benefit. "I was just looking at this floor seal, sir. There might be a leak." Leo's voice was soft, worn smooth with time. Julian let out a short, cruel laugh. "Your job is to push a mop, not play engineer. Now clean up that smudge your cart left." He pointed with the tip of a $1,000 shoe at a barely visible mark. "Some of us have actual work to do." Leo said nothing. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of a storm in his quiet eyes. He simply nodded. As he turned his cart, a roll of old, yellowed blueprints tied with a worn leather cord rattled inside his supply bucket. They were the building's original plans from 1978, a relic he'd saved from a dumpster years ago. A young receptionist, Sarah, watched from her desk, her face tight with a shame that wasn't hers. She looked from Julian's smug face to Leo's stooped shoulders, and a hot, silent anger began to brew inside her. The associates with Julian snickered, their loyalty bought with a cheap laugh at an old man's expense. The injustice hung in the air, thick and suffocating as the polished silence of the lobby returned. The lobby crowd reacted in silent, telling ways. Most looked away, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the patterns in the marble. Their silence was a verdict. It was easier to ignore the cruelty than to challenge the man who signed their paychecks. A few whispered, their words siding with power. "He's always staring at things," one said. "Creepy." Julian heard it, and his smirk widened. He had won. Leo, however, acted as if he'd heard nothing. He took a clean cloth and meticulously wiped the smudge his manager had pointed out, his movements deliberate and dignified. There was no anger in his hands, only the steady grace of a man who had weathered worse storms than a young man's ego. He then moved his cart towards the planter, his eyes once again drawn to the almost imperceptible water stain he'd noticed before. He knelt, his old knees protesting, and ran a single, knowing finger along the grout line. He felt it, a faint cold dampness. He glanced up, not at Julian, but at the ceiling far above, his gaze tracking a path only he could see. He was listening to the building. This was his hidden strength. For 40 years, he hadn't just cleaned this tower. He had learned its secrets, its groans, its sighs. He knew its heart. Julian, watching from the elevator, saw the old man kneeling. He rolled his eyes, a final, dismissive gesture. He saw a janitor obsessed with a crack in the floor. He failed to see an expert diagnosing a symptom. The elevator door slid shut, hiding Julian's miscalculation as he ascended to his office in the sky, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his feet was quietly, dangerously, beginning to fail. The shift happened at 2:17 p.m. A low, shuddering groan echoed up from the building's core, followed by a sudden, terrifying silence. The power went out. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the high-tech offices in an eerie red glow. The multi-million-dollar climate control system died, and the air immediately grew thick and still. Panic began to ripple through the floors. Julian stormed out of his office, his face flushed. "Get engineering on the line. Now!" He barked at his assistant. But the phones were dead. The digital building management system, his pride and joy, was a blank screen. His team of young, tech-savvy engineers stared uselessly at their dead tablets. They were pilots without a plane. From the service hallway, Leo appeared. He wasn't hurrying. He was moving with purpose. He held the old, rolled-up blueprints in his hand. "The backup generators didn't kick in," Leo said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "It's not an outage. It's the central transfer switch. It's flooded." Julian spun around. "And how would you know that?" he sneered, his fear making him cruel. "Did you read it in your tea leaves?" "I saw the leak this morning," Leo said simply, ignoring the insult. "In the lobby. That's directly above the primary electrical vault." Sarah, the receptionist, was now standing at the edge of the crowd, her eyes wide. She watched Leo, then looked at Julian's floundering team. She was the first to realize the shift that was happening. Leo walked to a forgotten metal panel on the wall, a relic from a bygone era. He unrolled the blueprints on the floor. The crisp, hand-drawn lines showed a network of tunnels and conduits the modern digital schematics had long since deleted. The blueprints were now the only map through the darkness. "There's a manual override," Leo said, pointing a steady finger at a faded line on the paper. "In the sub-basement. But we have to go now." He looked up, his gaze meeting Julian's. The battle had begun. The air in the sub-basement was thick with the smell of ozone and damp concrete. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling around a massive, sparking electrical conduit. This was the building's heart, and it was dying. Julian and his team stood back, their expensive suits looking absurd in the face of raw mechanical failure. Their faces were pale with fear. Leo, holding a heavy wrench, didn't hesitate. Using the blueprints as his guide, he moved into the darkness of a service tunnel Julian didn't even know existed. He found what he was looking for: a massive, rusted lever, covered in decades of dust. "This is it," he called out, his voice echoing. "The emergency bypass." Julian watched, his mind racing. "This is impossible. He's a janitor. He's going to get himself killed. He's going to get us all killed." He saw his career, his reputation, flashing before his eyes. A tremor started in his hand, a tiny, uncontrollable quiver he tried to hide by shoving it in his pocket. He had built his entire identity on being the smartest man in the room, and in this real, tangible crisis, he was utterly useless. Leo placed the wrench on the lever's giant nut. He put his entire weight into it, his face straining. For a moment, nothing happened. The building groaned again, a final, painful sigh. Sarah, who had followed them down, held her breath. The entire group of executives and engineers stood frozen, a silent audience to a battle of knowledge versus status. Then, with a deafening screech of protesting metal, the lever moved. A deep, resonant thump echoed through the chamber. Far above, the emergency lights shut off as the main power surged back to life. The hum of the climate control returned. The building was breathing again. The moral reversal was absolute and silent. In the returning light, Leo stood, breathing heavily, the old wrench in his hand. He was no longer just a janitor. He was the man who had saved them. Julian stared, his face a mixture of shock and a humiliation, so profound it was like a physical blow. The power hadn't just returned to the building. It had shifted fundamentally in the room. When they emerged back into the brightly lit lobby, the atmosphere was charged. The crowd of employees looked past Julian, their eyes fixed on Leo with a newfound respect. The whispers were different now. Not of mockery, but of awe. Julian tried to reclaim control, clearing his throat to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His authority had evaporated. At that moment, the main doors opened and Ms. Evelyn Reed, the building's owner and company CEO, swept in. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "What happened?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Julian stepped forward. "Ma'am, we had a minor technical issue, but my team and I wasn't asking you." Ms. Reed cut him off coldly. Her eyes settled on Leo, who was quietly trying to roll his blueprints back up. "I was asking him." A heavy silence fell. Julian froze, his mouth half open. Leo looked at the CEO, his expression humble. He wasn't there to gloat or seek revenge. He was there to report a problem. "Ma'am, the transfer switch failed due to water damage from a slow leak in the main conduit chase. It's been happening for a long time. The system needs a full inspection." "An old one." Ms. Reed stared at the blueprints in Leo's hands, then back at Julian's face, which was now ashen. The crowd's silent disapproval was a crushing weight. She understood everything. She turned back to Leo. "Thank you, mister." "Leo. Just Leo," he said. "Leo," she repeated, a hint of a smile on her lips. "It seems you know more about this building than anyone. I'd like you to show my head of operations exactly what needs to be done. Starting tomorrow, you'll be reporting directly to me." Then, without another glance at Julian, she said to her assistant, "And schedule a full review of the facilities management department, top to bottom." Julian tried to speak, to salvage something, but he was invisible. The crowd parted for Leo as he walked with Ms. Reed, his quiet dignity filling the space once occupied by another man's arrogance. 6 months later, the culture at Sterling Corp had fundamentally changed. The sterile, glass-walled office that was once Julian's now belonged to the Legacy Infrastructure and Safety Program. Inside, Leo, wearing a crisp navy blue polo shirt with Master Technician embroidered on the chest, stood beside the old, framed blueprints hanging on the wall. He wasn't just an employee. He was an institutional treasure. He was leading a new initiative, a program Ms. Reed had funded to audit all of the company's properties, blending old-school knowledge with new technology. He was training a team of young engineers, teaching them to listen to the buildings they managed. His work had become a viral story in trade publications and even on LinkedIn, hailed as a revolutionary approach to corporate asset management. The story was simple. The company that learned to listen to its janitor. One afternoon, Sarah, now the program's official administrator, walked in with a coffee for him. "The team from the Dallas office just called," she said, beaming. "They used your diagnostic method. Found a structural issue that could have cost millions." Leo smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. He looked at the blueprints, then at the young, eager faces in his program. He wasn't just fixing buildings anymore. He was building a foundation of respect for the unseen, overlooked work that holds everything together. He was ensuring the system itself was repaired for good. In a different, much smaller lobby across town, Julian Croft adjusted his tie. The building was glass and steel, but it felt cheap, a pale imitation of the world he'd lost. He was waiting for a junior-level meeting, another man in a suit in a sea of them. His name no longer opened doors. As he waited, a news report played on the lobby television. It was a feature on Chicago's most innovative corporate programs. Leo's face appeared on screen, standing proudly with his team. The headline read, "Sterling Corp's legacy program saves millions, redefines safety." Julian stared at the screen, his face impassive, but his hands, resting on his briefcase, were clenched into white-knuckled fists. He saw Leo's calm, dignified expression and felt a hollow ache in his chest. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was the cold, heavy weight of regret. He had possessed power but lacked wisdom. He had a title but no value. He turned away from the screen, his own reflection in the lobby glass showing a man who had lost more than a job. He had lost his way. The image of Leo's humble smile was a quiet, haunting indictment of his own empty ambition. True greatness is not found in a title on a door or the suit on your back. It is built quietly, over years of dedication, in the deep knowledge of things that others overlook. It's the wisdom to see the crack in the foundation before the walls begin to crumble. The final image is Leo, in the sub-basement, handing his old, heavy wrench to a young female engineer. He points to a mark on the original blueprints, his hand guiding hers. He is not just passing on a tool. He is passing on a legacy of seeing what truly matters. Some people build their careers. Others build the world we all stand on. Which one would you be?